Hi there. So great to be here. I'm familiar with this stage, so it's nice to spend some time up here and do something other than what I used to do on this stage. As human beings, we're pre-wired for storytelling. Stories are how we make sense of the world around us, and they put our lives in context. They give them meaning. And every culture uses story to impart important information that's vital to the survival of the culture itself. Even today, with GPS and smartphones, the Aborigines of Central Australia teach their children how to navigate the world around them through story. They lead the children out into the outback, and they immediately start giving visual cues and references. They talk about the tree and its history. They tell a story about the rock another 100 yards from the village. Finally, almost a half a mile away, they tell the story of the water god in the stream. And by doing so, they're gathering the students and the young people together, and they're sharing a common story that means something to their history and their culture. And what happens is when they tell the children to find their way home, they cry and they're worried and they're scared, and what the adults tell them is, visualize the stories in your head. They will lead you home. And it's this early trust in story and in visual context that builds the foundation for their ability to take on the walkabouts that happen later in life. Early in 2009, I scored a feature film called Moonlight Sonata by a friend and colleague named Çelik Kayalar, who was a writer and director I'd known for years. And in October of that year, he asked me if I would join him in Antalya, Turkey, on the beautiful Mediterranean coast for the Golden Orange International Film Festival, where I could speak about my work in film and games and television. And I was thrilled. I had never been to Turkey. And so I agreed to go, and one thing that led to another, and the film began to pick up momentum, and it won several awards around the world. But I knew that this one homecoming for Çelik back in Turkey was a very special occasion. So I was honored that he asked me to join him there. But I would be arriving a few days after he had already left for Antalya. So when I arrived a few days after Çelik had, I was met by Umar, who was Çelik's cousin. And he was a very stoic, quiet, stern, retired architect. And he had agreed to let me stay at his flat in Istanbul and then take me to the airport the next day to fly out to Antalya. So the next day, when we were traveling through the area of Istanbul, he started showing me some of these amazing places, like the Blue Mosque or the cathedral at St. Sophia. And these are places that I'd only read about or seen in books. And my father was an architect, so I had some familiarity with him, and I was fascinated with the art and the history and the story that I was getting from these places. And as we're driving along, Umar looks over at me and he says, very straightforward as he did everything, he said, you know, the family and I are confused and we're stunned when Çelik gave up this promising career as a celebrated scientist to make movies in America. And I said, did you say scientist? I've known Çelik for years. He never mentioned anything about science. So I knew Çelik as an affable, talented, funny actor and director and writer. He ran an acting school in San Francisco, but he'd never mentioned anything about science. I had recently discovered that he was a very talented painter because all the paintings in the film, Moonlight Sonata, he had created himself. And when I found that out, it made sense to me because visual artists often share mediums and experiment in different ways. But science, I was having trouble connecting the dots with the science part. So as I pressed Umar for more details, he told me that Çelik had been a very good student. He had gone to UCLA and gotten his PhD. He had become a very valued researcher and, in fact, had made several discoveries that ultimately he handed off to his mentor and his colleague, Dr. Paul Boyer at UCLA. And these theories, Paul Boyer then took and spent the next 20 years proving them. And what Çelik did was he said, you know what, science is great, but I feel more passion when I'm doing my art. And so I started to make this connection, and I couldn't wait then to get to Antalya and meet with Celik and work up the trust in him that I could speak about this one, because the way Uma reacted told me that this might be a sore subject. So I wanted to make sure that I was sensitive to maybe there was something going on with the science that I wasn't aware of. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I got to Antalya, I met with Celik. He greeted me at the airport and with his trademark big smile and bear hug. And we finally made our way to a beautiful cafe overlooking the blue Mediterranean. And I started to ask him about his science days. And he was just so excited to talk about science. He told me that oftentimes when he was working in science, he would have dreams of things going on inside the human body. Things that he would then wake up and draw or paint in order to not only remember what he had seen in his dreams, but then he could show it to someone. That's key, is to be able to have your ideas understood by others who may not have the same education or the same knowledge. So this was fascinating to me. And I knew after our 2-hour conversation that it was something that I really wanted to explore more in my own life. I had been involved in the arts for many, many years and mostly music, and this was a new way that I saw to tell stories that could change lives and bring artists and scientists and storytellers together. So that was the beginning of the next phase of my life. Just a few weeks after I returned to the United States and my job here at Expression College as the president and the creative director, we received a call from the office of Dr. Stephen Chu, who was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab at Cal. And he and his team needed help to tell this incredible story of a process they had discovered and been able to replicate in the laboratory, where they could understand how a termite's stomach breaks down grasses and wood into simple fuel, sugar, that could become simple fuel. And that was something that would have a tremendous impact on biofuels. So we put together a team of talented students. They met with the scientists at the lab, and together they created a story arc, and they designed images that could quickly distill this complex process that could be understood by a very wide audience, from school children to library, people in Congress and educational institutions and backers and funders and all this stuff. And so we were able to create a short video that encapsulated this complex science into a simple, entertaining way that they could get their ideas across to the rest of the world. Stephen Chu went on to become the Secretary of Energy under President Obama in his first term. And he continues to be a proponent of using rich media and storytelling to explain science and to get young people interested in being scientists again, especially in this country. We don't have a NASA program to speak of. There's fewer things for young people to look to be inspired by in the world of science, although it's happening all around us. The weaving together of science with art and storytelling is something that's happened for thousands of years. We see it in the earliest cave paintings, where the artist was trying to depict natural phenomena that was baffling to him or her. And they had to give it a visual context so that they could actually explain it or involve the rest of their culture in the understanding of what was going on. During the Renaissance, there was a huge explosion of interest in the human body and in anatomy, both in a scientific way and an artistic way at the same time. And there were families that brought these two together so that they could share their resources. And the anatomists wanted to understand the body so that they were the executioners of the day. They wanted to prolong suffering of criminals. And the artists wanted to understand how the body functioned in its most intricate ways so they could depict it and recreate it in a way that was more accurate than ever before. And you have to understand that Europe was emerging from the heavy hand of the church, who considered the human body to be vile and repulsive. So artists were creating accurate nudes by the thousands, as we can see. Leonardo da Vinci alone made over 1,500 anatomical drawings in his lifetime. And these became a very powerful tool for him to describe ideas and theories that no one had ever explored before. It also gave him a huge advantage in selling his ideas, whether they were to patrons who were going to pay him to do an incredible piece of art, but a lot of what da Vinci did was he designed things for the military. And he could present them to them that in a way that they could understand, even though they had no idea what he was talking about, what he saw in his dreams and in his mind. Michelangelo as well, another artist from the era, had an incredible understanding of how the human body worked. And if you look closely at the picture on the roof of the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling of Sistine Chapel, known as the creation of Adam, you can clearly see that he not only understood the brain, but he knew its size, its functional areas. And this was something that he hid in plain sight just to prove to himself that he could do it. Much of science today, and the visualizations we do for medicine and for science and for technology, we're using the same tools and the same technology and the same techniques as they use in blockbuster movie making. We now design assets within a transmedia framework. So we create various media to be up-purposed and used in multiple formats. We use them on the web, we use them in mobile devices, in lectures, at conferences, in recruiting, in marketing. We can create assets that can be used over and over again and easily be distributed to explain what's going on. I met engineer Ben Kassira a few years ago, who had started a nonprofit in Oakland called SciArc. I was fascinated by what they were doing at SciArc. He had created state-of-the-art 3D scanning technology that he hoped would be used all over the world to capture in 3 dimensions and digitally preserve what he called heritage sites. And these sites were areas that, or places or things, artifacts that potentially either were going to disappear through erosion or they might be destroyed, such as the incredible Buddhas of Bamiyan, 1,600 years old, that were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. What had survived cannon fire by Genghis Khan 800 years before was reduced to rubble with dynamite in a matter of seconds. This heinous act inspired Ben to get in the hands of educational institutions and government agencies around the world this technology to be used in order to preserve these sites and these artifacts. Religious sites, architectural buildings, places that had either been destroyed or were being destroyed. He hoped that they would use this data to create someday 3D simulations of these spaces and these places that we could walk into, and through the combination of sound design and smell and texture and light, that we could be transported to these long-gone places and experience them as if we were there, when they were the fulcrum of technology and innovation. These are incredibly exciting times. And again, to be here at Expression College for this is really full circle, because the same things that the students are learning here and that these incredible faculty are teaching can be used in ways so far outside of just plain entertainment to really change the world. Just blocks or miles from here are some of the most famous laboratories in the world. They're doing bleeding edge science from Cal and Stanford. We have Amherst down the street, the Joint Bioenergy Institute. Bayer, Novartis, the Joint Genome Institute. They're all right here, and all of them have thousands of experiments and dozens of incredible stories to tell. These visually stunning game-like experiences are going to ignite a new generation of explorers. They're going to continue to search for ways to improve the quality of the life that we live on this earth. And they're going to broaden our understanding and future generations' understanding of the universe around and inside of us, from the microscopic to the infinite. And they're going to do that by helping us to see it through amazing stories. Thank you.